Okay, so I just want to give a full disclosure. Daniel is not holding a gun to my head as I film this review. That would be crazy.
No, Jay, I said don't tell them. Don't. Yeah, you're gonna have to cut that part out.
Please send help. Today I'm reviewing Breach of Peace by Daniel Greene. This is his debut novella in what is planned to be a trilogy of novellas leading up to his main series of books, which is going to be full-length novels. The kids on the street are calling it bop, and it's a bop. I'm sure those of you that watch my channel are probably familiar with a small little channel called Daniel Greene. He's only one of the most prominent fantasy reviewers and a pillar on the fantasy side of YouTube. Not to mention, he's also just a great stand-up guy. Dude, you can't make me say that.
Tell them.
Now, some of you may know that I've worked as a freelance book designer and formatter, so I contacted Daniel and I was like, dude.
Do you need some of that book cover design? I'm your guy.
That's exactly how it happened. That's actually how I find all of my book design jobs. I just wander around the street aimlessly and ask people. Sometimes they say yes. So I worked with Daniel doing the design for the cover, getting everything laid out, and the beautiful artwork is by Felix Ortiz. He does such amazing art. I'm gonna leave a link to his ArtStation account down below. I'll be posting an interview with Daniel Greene in the next few days if you want to learn more about his experience with self-publishing, as well as see some earlier prototypes for the cover font. Now, with all that being said, I'm going to keep this review as unbiased as possible. I feel like I'm always kind of hesitant going into a book that was written by a YouTuber because a lot of times their audience really hypes it up. And let's be honest, there's a lot of YouTuber books that just aren't really that good. But I'm happy to say that Breach of Peace is a solid debut novella. There's a few little things that I'll get into, but overall my experience reading this book was very enjoyable. And I'm looking forward to reading more that Daniel writes. So let's get into the review. The story opens with a crime scene described in gruesome detail. An Imperial family is found butchered in their home, and it's up to 3 inspectors to get to the bottom of it. This includes Inspector Clyd, as well as her husband Samuel, and a man named Chapman, who's kind of like the star of the 7th Precinct. There's evidence leading to a rebel group trying to stab fear into the Empire, but there's also a deeper conspiracy that's coming to light. And Clyd struggles to trust everyone, including the officers around her. This introduction really sets the dark tone that you can expect to see from this novella. I feel like the description and the atmosphere are especially strong in this intro. This was actually my favorite part of the novella, as well as a scene that's near the end that I don't want to spoil. This novella has been ranking on Amazon in several different genres: dark fantasy, grimdark fantasy, military fantasy, flintlock fantasy, and even horror. Personally, I would probably say it's like detective fantasy with some horror elements. The dialogue and the dynamic between these 3 characters especially, I found to be one of the strongest parts of this novella. I think that Daniel writes dialogue really well, besides the odd clunky line here and there. I would have liked to see a little bit more of Samuel. However, I do appreciate the relationship dynamic between Samuel and Clyd. It's kind of refreshing reading a relationship that already has a lot of chemistry to it. And then there is Chapman, who is probably my favorite character. He's kind of an ass sometimes, but it also, you can see that he's kind of wired a different way. So sometimes he's not trying to be an ass. And this is the character where I see a little bit of an Arthur Conan Doyle influence, which I love because I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, and I know Daniel is as well. And to me, Chapman kind of feels like a nod to a Sherlock type of character, and I just love that. It doesn't feel like it's blatantly ripping off Sherlock in any way, just a nod in that direction. Chapman and Clyd especially, I felt like were very distinct, and they're the ones that I really cared about in this novella. Samuel, I did like. I just would have liked to see more of him, I guess. Now let's talk about the world building. For some reason, I automatically was thinking of like steampunk because it had guns in a fantasy story, and I was picturing the world to look similar to something from like the Dishonored video games, but it's not really steampunk at all. I even messaged Daniel about this, and he was like, no, it's not steampunk. It's set in sort of an industrial era world that's run by an Orwellian society, one that's led by someone calling themselves God, and there's basically no free will. The police force work for God, and they basically got like unlimited power. They can get away with whatever because they're above everyone else. And we are following these people, these police officers receiving cases from the Almighty. It almost feels like a holy experience to them, like they're being drawn closer to the Almighty by following its will. I found it so interesting that we're getting the perspective of these officers that are basically indoctrinated into this religious cult that reigns over the government. I remember Daniel stating in a video that one of his biggest fears would be people projecting the beliefs of his characters onto him, because he's writing from a perspective that he categorically does not believe in. Now, I have seen a small amount of controversy, a very small amount, of people that are trying to like pin Daniel Greene as if he believes this stuff to be right. And if you want to know his response to that, he recently made a video all about authorial intent and how authors don't always believe what they write. Just because somebody writes about something does not mean they automatically endorse it. Why don't people know that? As much as I love the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, I don't like some of the things that a lot of the characters do, and I don't think Joe Abercrombie is supporting torture. This is something I kind of worry about with my own writing, because a lot of the characters I'm writing about are not necessarily on the right side and doing the right things, and apparently that means I endorse that. I feel like it's pretty clear after reading Breach of Peace that he's leading up to a social critique on the power given to authorities as well as religious extremists, and I think there's a conspiracy in this book that's building up, and it's gonna be revealed to the protagonist later on. Anyway, enough controversy, let's get back to the world building. I do feel like with such a small format, it's only 140 pages, I do feel like Daniel does really well at building a world and establishing its different social dynamics. And I feel like this info naturally flows through the story. It's not like we're getting a big info dump of information. However, I do kind of feel like we're lacking description in some other areas. Besides like the really detailed intro, there's just some other environments that I just can't really picture that well. And I feel like the cover art does a good job at making my imagination fill that in, but I would have liked to see a little bit more work done on building description and atmosphere to this world. Now this leads me to talk about the writing. Now I found that the pacing for this book, it was really fast paced. The structure of the novella just kind of keeps that very well balanced. I would say the prose is pretty straightforward. It's nothing too elegant, but it's solid. It goes with this gritty, dark story that's being told, and I think it does it well, except I do wish there was a little bit more description in some cases, like I said. But as far as like inspirations and things I could compare it to me, I'm more so getting like a Stephen King mixed with Arthur Conan Doyle, mixed with maybe a little bit of H.P. Lovecraft. That's kind of the mix I'm feeling, and I think that's a great mix. There's a lot of intrigue that carries its way through the entire book, and I feel like he does a good job at balancing those small character moments with some more like heavy action scenes. Now, I guess that one of the cons I have is that I kind of like my novellas to feel a little bit more contained and feel like they have a bit of a resolution, but Breach of Peace kind of feels like an episode or a part one to something, and I feel like it's kind of hard to give judgment to a teaser of a story, and it is kind of a teaser of what we can expect later on. And luckily, it does seem like Daniel plans on publishing these novellas pretty fast, which I think is a good move. Now, overall, I am very impressed with Daniel's debut. I think he's only going to grow as a writer from here, and I can't wait to see some of the technical aspects of his writing improve and to see where the story is headed, especially once like the main series comes out. I'm pretty excited for that. If you are sensitive to dark themes and brutal crime descriptions, then you probably don't want to read this book. I would recommend it to anyone who's a fan of, mystery thrillers or dark fantasy. Then I would definitely recommend Breach of Peace. And I didn't even mention that the audiobook is narrated by Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. And of course, I will leave links in the description to where you can pre-order it. It officially comes out on March 30th, I believe. Anyway, if you like this video, make sure to drop a comment and like and subscribe, and check out my interview with Daniel Greene, which will be up in a couple days.